11th November, 11 a.m. and lot of ones today. What a coincidence, right? In our date also, 11 November. Today we are going to talk about one thing, one single thing which unites all of us with Mother Nature, One Health, an ecosystem which has existed and which the mankind needs to nurture if we have to grow holistically on Mother Earth. Hello and welcome to Biotechnica's yet another powerful episode. And today we have some excellent experts coming in to talk about One Health, a unified approach towards sustainability and welfare. Whether it is humans, plants, animals, or whatever component of Mother Earth, we all are unified together and we all are interdependent on each other. What a beautiful co-relationship or symbiotic relationship we all share. So at Biotechnica this morning, 11 a.m., we chose this particular date because of a specific reason, because there are a lot of ones in that. One, everything is all interrelated, symbiotic, and interdependent. One Health is that approach. So when we thought about this webinar, I was having a discussion with our mentor, Dr. Jagdish Mittur, and he was sharing his approach towards this COVID pandemic which has happened and why this zoonotic transmission happened and how it traveled through bats or whatever you call it into humans. And that is where he told me about this approach, that this could have been avoided had this One Health approach existed in almost every country of the world. So today we come to you live for that one thing, which is very important for all of us to talk about. We must respect the biotic and abiotic environment around us. And we are joined today by Dr. Srinath and Professor Utpal, along with, of course, our moderator, Dr. Jagdish, and two of our community activists, Mrs. Navina and Ms. Sujaya, who will be talking in detail. They'll be taking up questions on how can we implement One Health in our country and the world. So let me quickly bring in the moderator for today. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting to you Dr. Jagdish Mittur.
So much, Shekhar. Welcome to all the participants who have tuned into this particular webinar. The theme of the webinar is a unified approach towards welfare and sustainability. As Shekhar rightly said, there are lots of ones in it. It's 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month of 2020. And what an amazing year this has been, for good or for bad. And hopefully it's not the 11th hour when it comes to saving our planet, saving our environment. So thank you, Biotechnica, Team Biotechnica, and in particular, its CEO, Mr. Shekhar Suman, for providing us this wonderful platform, which reaches out to thousands and thousands of students, faculty, and also many people who wish well for the society, to share our thoughts on One Health. Thank you all so much. We want to sort of spend this time to better understand what does One Health mean and why it is so important. Next slide, please. One Health is about the balance and harmony we need to respect, we need to create with what's around us, be they be plants, be they be animals, insects, birds, and what have you, and humans, of course. In one word, the environment, in another word, the ecosystem. I believe if you go back to the scriptures of our heritage, doesn't matter where you are in the world, a lot of people, our ancestors, used to follow good practices. And that's how they could pass on a planet that was better than what it is today. Our responsibility is to see how we can take care, nurture it, to pass it on to the next generation and the generations afterwards. That is our responsibility. Unfortunately, in the name of development and economy, we have really destroyed or beginning to destroy a lot of the good things that we inherited from our ancestors. And that's something that I feel very guilty about, and I'm sure there are many other people who also feel guilty about. Any activity or set of activities we perform can have a direct impact on the balance or the harmony that may be there, and that could be going in a negative direction. And some of which can lead to geological disturbances, destruction of forests, flooding, etc. And more than something that affects all of us in a very rapid way is emerging of new diseases. And we must realize that the plants and the animals act as barriers to protect humans from many of these diseases, many of these destructive forces. Unfortunately, many of us don't necessarily see that. Sometimes we see many animals as our enemies, and we begin to not interact with them better. So currently we are in a crisis due to the impact of COVID-19, coronavirus, as popularly known as. And it will take a long time to recover. So please note this recovery, if at all it happens, it will happen at the expense of several sacrifices, and many of these sacrifices are immeasurable. We cannot put a number on it. We can talk about trillions of dollars in terms of economy, but can we put any value that on human life? That's impossible. So the lesson that we need to really learn from this warning alert that has been given to us by nature is, how do we avoid such disease outbreaks in the future? Or at least how can we be better prepared to face such emerging diseases? There are a lot of examples. Zoonotic diseases, they're called, also known as zoonosis, are caused by germs and infectious agents that spread between animals to humans, and vice versa also. Don't think that we don't spread diseases to the animals. We are also carrying a lot of diseases, and some of the vector-borne diseases can actually go from us to animals also. Rabies is one thing that is directly, if a rabid animal bites us, then we get rabies. But there are mosquito-borne or other vector-borne diseases as well. So how do we control this? So we need participation by everyone, by the governments, most importantly by the governments, the relevant departments, the policy makers, and more than that, the people who need to implement those policies. I think that's where we keep failing. We only wake up when something like a COVID-19 hits us. And even today, I don't think we have really woken up that much. We need participation from the environmentalists, experts, the tribal people who seem to have lived for centuries in harmony with nature. We need to interact with them. We need to have scientists on board. We need to have animal welfare experts on board. And we need, most importantly, we need common citizens like you and I. So, thus far, in the background of the disaster caused by COVID-19, the whole world has been very busy in handling the crisis. It's like firefighting. And this is that's frustrating me. We seem to be talking more and more and more, which is required, of course, of how we're going to handle this COVID-19. And there's a lot of confusion about it. But hardly any talk I hear, apart from one or two, whether through webinars or through conferences or through social media, we don't hear what is it we need to do today to avoid such destruction of the planet, avoid such prevention of emerging diseases. So this is where we need to make some sort of an inroads. So our attempt today, friends, is just one small step, I would like to say, towards utilizing the opportunity that we have that is provided by Shaker and his team on Biotechnica platform. So we need to be talking about promoting One Health, and we have experts in this area. And if I can go to my next slide, I would like to introduce the next speaker. And the agenda here is an extremely exciting one. We have two speakers from academia and industry. Dr. Srinath, I will introduce him through a video. And then there will be a talk by him for about 25 minutes. And then he will be followed by Dr. Utpal Tatu, a professor in IIT, who does a lot of work on animal diseases, is one of the global experts when it comes to animal health and public health. Followed that talk by Dr. Utpal Tatu, I'm very excited to present two women who seem to have dedicated their lives, perhaps the latter half of their lives, towards taking care of animals in any which way they can. That is Ms. Navina Kamath and Ms. Sujaya Jagdish. So hopefully we will have a lot of information that is shared, and hopefully those of you, particularly the students and faculty, will have a lot of questions. At the end of these presentations, we will have a panel discussion, which actually is a Q&A session, where both speakers, Dr. Srinath and Dr. Utpal Tatu, as well as the animal welfare experts, Ms. Navina Kamath and Ms. Sujaya Jagdish will participate, and they will be very glad to take questions, at least to figure out what is that you can do, what is that we can do. So with that, I would like to end my introduction here and bring on the first speaker, Dr. Srinath. So Dr. Srinath is a founder managing director, Genofi Biotech Private Limited. He's the founder and manager of Genofi Private Limited, generating zebra fish, not zebras, but zebra fish platforms for drug discovery and preclinical studies to develop cardiac and neurological disease platforms. Dr. Srinath carried out his doctoral work at the Industrial Toxicology Institution, CSR institution at IITR, where he studied various microbial technologies for bioremediation of toxic chromium from tannery effluent. He graduated from Dr. RML Abad University in Ayodhya, in Faizabad district of UP. He, from 2002 to 2011, Dr. Srinath worked as a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Microbiology and Cell Biology at IIC Bengaluru. And during his postdoc, he was part of a research team that worked extensively to identify mycobacterial DNA repair enzymes. You know that mycobacteria causes tuberculosis and leprosy and so on. Characterize them and decipher its physiological relevance. Between 2012 and 2017, something that he really holds very close to his heart, he taught undergraduates of Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru, co-founded an undergraduate biology club called the Naturalists, and supervised several summer research projects of IAC, and responsible for the growth of and mentorship of many undergraduate students. With that introduction, I would like to pass on the controls to Dr. Srinath for him to take through what really One Health means for him and what is that we can learn from his talk. Over to you, Dr. Srinath.
Good morning, one and all. I am really grateful and thankful to Dr. Jagdish Mittur for that kind words of introducing me. To all the listeners who understand the relevance or want to know what is the relevance of One Health. It's a wonderful effort put by Shekhar and his team, and I'm really thankful to him. And I'm looking forward for their contribution to as services to the community, as to the students in for coming decades and decades. And it's my honor that I'm sharing this space with Professor Utpal Tatu, who's doing a wonderful high-end research at IIC, as well as community participants, Sujaya as well as Navina. It's my pleasure. Now, to talk about One Health, we have to understand several intricate parts of it. Can I have the first slide, please? Next slide. So to understand what is health, let's go by a simple definition which WHO puts. It states it's a complete physical, mental, social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. That means it is not just infection of microbes. It has got to do a lot with the environment, the participating people around us. And that takes us to the concept of One Health. Next slide. And One Health, as CDC defines, is a collaborative, multi-sectorial, and transdisciplinary approach working at the local, regional, national, and global levels with the goal of achieving optimal health outcomes, recognizing the interconnection between people, animals, plants, and their shared environment. Now, I want to emphasize the beauty of this definition. The word is people, it's not human. And people brings out the social component of them, because whatever they do has an impact on all other stakeholders. Now, I wanted to understand, is there a word in Sanskrit which embodies this whole concept? Next slide, please. And the word is called as Lokashema. So it has been there that welfare of earth is very critical and essential. And we have to, as Dr. Mittur said, that there have been ages of our civilization kind of thing, which have been understanding this concept, but we have somewhere lost that touch of it. Now, what I'm going to do is that to bring forth, I will try to establish what are the connects between these four stakeholders. Next slide. And if you understand by that, I'm putting connects between these four stakeholders into three categories. The first one is sharing space. We all live in a given space, right? But we are confined in one region. The second connect is very crucial, which makes Earth as a different planet altogether. That is exclusive. We are forgetting that component. And third are microbes, which I call as biocatalysts, the game changer, because they do all, even if we are not around, they are doing the work or maintaining the system, sustaining the ecosystem. Next slide, please. The next slide is to emphasize the interconnect of between all these four stakeholders as co-inhabitants. So in terms of environment, we as individual, group or community share this space as city, town, village or jungle. And as I say this, you will understand from one direction to another direction, the greenery has gone up as well as the human component has gone down. And in all this component, the animals are there and which are as companion, community part, or they are wild in nature. Next slide. Now, when we talk about food as an interconnect, it is purely nutrition. And right now, we are emphasizing in terms of people, where people derive nutrition from both animals and plants, and they are all of us are consumers, and some of us are actually producer as well as processor. Now, both animals and plants derive this nutrient from the environment, which we as people, as community, work towards it, incorporate in our life, and then whatever is generated as waste from us actually goes to the environment. And environment now acts as a sink where it's both abiotic and biotic component, makes the cycle of bringing it back as components for animals and plants as nutrition. Next slide. When we talk in terms of the sharing of the environment and space and food, we have always been in contact with microbes. Microbes are there with us, animals and plants as microbiome, right? Let it be our gut, let it be our skin, it is present as microbes all over it. In terms of plants, they are also part of the root environment. Sometimes they are actually pathogens and they are interacting with us, and that is what brings out the responsibility of the cells to protect us, and immunity develops up. Now, when I talk about immunity, and we have to understand that we have to have a sharing component with the environment, and the microbes contribute directly as well as indirectly. The direct contribution to us, as I mentioned right now, as microflora, but indirect is that we all understand that without nitrogen fixation, this world wouldn't have existed. And there also, the microbes exist with plants as direct contact, as rhizobium does nodules, or indirect, where azospirilla fixes nitrogen in the environment. And in this given environment, the microbes are actually having their own struggle for existence. And for that, they keep on producing antimicrobials. And this is what we as humans exploit for our own survival to sustain the environment. And we have a abused usage of antimicrobials. Now, this all three interconnects. If I put into one slide, next slide, please, and have it as a complete network, you see how each and every component are interlinked to each other. Now, what I will do, I will not be able to emphasize this whole interconnect in the given time. But what I will do, I pick up few aspects of it, which I'm showing in the next slide, and try to establish how these networks are critical. Next slide, please. And what it means is to understand, even if we tweak little bit in one of the connect, it has a devastating outcome. In some of the connects, if you do a tweaking, but if you keep on doing for longer time, it has a huge impact subsequently. Let me take an example of plastic right now. Plastic has been in environment for a long time, and now we are going to see lot many effects in our own community in terms of health, in terms of immunity. So what I'm going to do is I will take one aspect of impact of human activity. Next slide. The first impact, which is very crucial right now, we are talking about very specifically for zoonotic diseases. And you can see the most critical outcome is about rabies. And the plus point is that we have the rabies vaccine, and vaccination is done for both humans as well as the animals. And you see, it costed around 124 billion to keep us and animals away from rabies. And we have to sustain that. We have to understand how much economics are involved in that. Now, other 3 points which are in pink, if you see, they are all viruses, airborne viruses specifically. It is swine flu, bird flu, and if I allow to add up, coronavirus is also going to come up. This is data from 2015. So you see, these all economically important diseases affecting us are actually airborne. Now they have moved from animals to us, and now it is transmitting between human to human. I really want to say that one way to protect ourselves in this given aspect, very simple, as in the first slide you would have seen, a lady with a mask. Because they are airborne, you just cover yourself with a mask and you are less susceptible. I'm not saying completely avoiding it, but you are lesser susceptible, right? And you have to understand our industrialization has brought out several methods of containing bacterial infection coming from food, coming from soil, but we have to now worry about any pathogens which are coming through air. Next slide, please. So I pick up the first example in relation with immunity, right? And obviously we are having coronavirus as COVID-2 right now. But we have to understand there are seasonal viruses present as coronavirus as seasonal viruses. So here is a study which shows that when an infection happens, the body response is to generate antibodies, right? It's a response for having immunity and a memory cells for it. So this publication, which came in September in Nature Medicine, followed the serum, and the serum is of the 10 healthy individuals who had been in a clinical study for past 35 years at least, and none of them had serious illness. Now, what has been done in this given study is to understand if an antibody response is there, that means you had an exposure to it, right? And once your immune system goes down, you are able to get reinfected. That is what we understand. And here in this particular one graph, if you see, wherever you see a white spot, it actually tells that even though your antibodies are present, these 10 individuals, one of them or at least, had got infection of this of seasonal coronavirus. And subsequently, if you see in the colored dots, means the antibody level had gone down and then they got infected. Now, what it tells that the immune system or the protective immune response is actually short-lived for coronaviruses, which is very understanding. We have to understand this aspect because in coming years, this COVID-2 is also going to be a seasonal coronavirus. And we have to understand that we have to have, I'm not sure how the vaccine are going to be protective, whether they have some efficacy or not, or if it is short-term efficacy, or it is going to be long-term efficacy. We can just speculate. So that means what? We have to wait we have to wait for vaccines to be there in the market. Next slide, please. Now, if we want to understand the impact which we had recently through Nipah virus in India, the slide actually shows you that the infection to humans in India and Bangladesh happened directly through the bats. Whereas in other regions like Australia and Malaysia, it was through an intermediate mammal. We had 3 outbreaks in 2001, 2007, and 2018. Fortunately, we were able to contain it in the second and third outbreaks very, very quickly. But what WHO says that even those 10 days spent in containing the outbreak could have been further reduced to 5 days. That means instead of 19 deaths, it could have been brought down further. Because what it is been understood is that the doctors just made physical observation and concluded the person is infected with Nipah. Not even genomic study or RT-PCR was done. And by the time the patient had died. Now, if I take your attention to the next image into it, where you see a terrestrial range of bats in India, it actually covers 80% of the land mass. So is it a potential? Is it a potential pathogen for us, for zoonosis, Nipah virus? We have to understand, and some activity has to be there at the ground level. Next slide. Now I'm talking about a very critical outcome which happened last year November, where there was death of at least 10,000 of birds at the lake, Sambar Lake in Rajasthan. And in 5 days, the local authorities figured out it's not bird flu, but then it was predicted as avian botulism. And in another 5 days, IVRI confirmed that it is avian botulism. Now, what is botulism? Botulism is caused by a microbe, a bacterial pathogen, which is Clostridium botulinum. So, what it does when the environment is not favorable for it, it starts to form spores, and along with that, it forms a particular spore, which is toxic. It's a neurotoxin, and when it starts to divide and replicate, it releases those toxins into the environment. Or when I say environment, it can be both aquabiotic and abiotic. In this given case, it had killed few of the birds predictably, and these killed birds were having maggots which were carrying this uh, dividing Clostridium, and that was again consumed by other birds because all the deaths which were reported were carnivorous birds, not herbivorous birds. So it is not the first time avian botulism has been reported. It's there for many, many incidents in India and abroad. But what has been done in this case? They want to say that it's a job of wetland preservation. But how long we have to give all the blaming to the government? Many times we have to take the responsibility. In this case, what happened? The rain. There was a huge amount of rain which led to rain water get deposited in a particular section of the lake, and this is where the crustaceans grew. And then when the water receded, it turned anaerobic and led the Clostridium to replicate and turn into spores. Next slide, please. And when we talk about the bird flu, this is a very sarcastic cartoon which shows that what is the human's response. That if the birds have another sneeze, we'll cut the rope. Well, this is happened, and but it has to get some kind of control over it, or we culling of animals is not an answer for it. Next slide actually emphasizes that it is not just birds. It's happening right now for mammals also. In the mammal right now we are talking about are minks. Minks are mammals which are present in wild. They have nice furry skin, so you can see in the image, and a lot of people like to have their ears coming out from that farmed minks. This skin is a luxury item, but right now, because corona is a mutated coronavirus is coming from them to humans, this is a response from our side that we are going to kill that. Can't we think of a method of containing it or eradicating it? Or we know that the coronavirus can be recovered. They can recover from coronavirus. Why is killing an option? A thought has to be put from both the government and authorities. Next slide. When we talk about impact, we know the virus, the vaccination part was discovered through the tubercular coming on the ladies who were milking the cows. And it's unfortunate that even now, zoonotic tuberculosis is there. In 2016, there were 12,000 deaths in US alone. Decades and centuries have gone after discovering that zoonotic tuberculosis is there, but we have not done anything in that regard. And it doesn't help hurt us. It hurts the livestock productivity and as well as the economics part involved in it. Next slide. And the next slide shows what is our response here. It's very disheartening that you see the cattle are on the street and they are eating what? Leftovers? Who knows? A botulism can happen in that given situation. We have to have more compassion towards this animal. Even if someone is thinking it as a food in subsequent, but what kind of food is going to be there? The cow or the cattle is digesting plastic here, right? Next slide. And here I'm showing a community dog sitting in front of a consumer's place. I don't know will it get the food from that given place, but I have seen many places where these dogs get food from other regions. It is not the food, it is a leftover, and we really don't know what kind of infections are there in those poultry and livestock which they actually feed. These dogs also get cancer, dogs also get diabetes. What is their role here? Are they really going to suffer out due to the outcome of us? Next slide. And it's thankful that people like Sujay and Navina are contributing towards these community dogs. Wonderful. We will be listening to them in at the end. This is one dog which I think Professor Tatu will also remember was in the between MCV and biochemistry department, and we used to call her Piggy. For 2 decades, we have been, people have been taking care of her, and she was so very critical that if someone touches someone other's vehicle, she'll be barking over it. See what kind of association we have with these community dogs. Next slide. Though I don't have a pet at home, but I always enjoy their companionship whenever I visit to some of the friends who have. And here we can see Dr. Jagdish Mittur with his pets, rescued dogs and street dogs. It's a wonderful thing that he's doing from his end, and he's inspiring many of us. Next slide. The next slide shows how these animals are existing in the city, right? This is on the MCB terrace where I used to give food in the afternoon. And see, beauty here, there is a prey, and there is a mammal here. Now the squirrel is thinking whether I should look for the food or I should turn into a prey. Next slide. So what can be done from our end? Okay, here I'm emphasizing on the very neglected part regarding the epidemics or the trees or the plant life. Here, myristal rust, which emerged, was discovered in 1884, centuries ago. But then, as you see, it has transitioned from that South American continent to several parts of the world. It has yet to touch India and Deccan part of it. But as the trading and the geographical outreach and movement has increased, it has reached to Singapore in 2015. We really don't know when it is going to come to India. And one of the plant myristal family is guava. It is going to affect our crops subsequently. We have to think about it. This is airborne, but still it is getting transported through trading between the countries. Next slide. The next slide shows how one end it's beautiful green and another you are seeing killing happening. And the killing is not by a pathogen which directly communicates between two. Here it is transmitted by a bug called a spittle bug. This spittle bug feeds on the sap of these olive trees. And unfortunately, it transfers from one plant to another plant by biting and putting the needle inside the xylem. And then this microbe, this bacteria, kills the plant. Unfortunate thing. Next slide. So what we have to do from our end to remain sustainable? The answer is, next slide, we as people have to change our activities. And what are those activities? Next slide. I'm trying to cluster it into 2 or 3. As society, as organization, and health industry. In society, it is the compassion, self-discipline, parenting, and education. In terms of organization, to have a framework for sustainability and then implementing it as policy and continuous monitoring of it. So it has to be a complete workaround. It has to be get the data, work over it. It has to be a refining kind of thing. That is very, very critical. Now, if we talk about health industry, we need to incorporate comparative medicine and comparative genomics. Now, if you ask me one question that you want to pick just one component to work upon, I will work on parenting. Because parenting is the critical part where you teach the next generation by being an example by yourself, and that what a next generation has to do. I know it's a long thing, but then it has a huge impact. Next slide. So if we pick up this particular slide and we say sustainability, whose work is it? Whose responsibility is this? The garbage what we are seeing, even though a government official has put a notice, still we are not worried about it because we think it's just 500 rupees or it is not in my neighborhood. I've seen people throwing garbage from one area to another area while traveling in vehicle and it goes zoom. Is this the way? Because they don't want trash in their place, they are happy to have the trash in some other place. We have to have some kind of self-discipline. And I think as education, this has to be part. I think the new education policy has to incorporate both sustainability as well as agriculture in its component. Next slide. Now, it's not that nothing has been done. Okay, people are working at framework, and the framework is with these four clusters as economics, ecology, politics, and culture. People have been thinking that economics is the main standalone, and rest all are connected to it or dependent on it. But the United Nations and other organizations have realized that no, they have equal weightage to it, and they have worked on how to do an estimation through it. And the next slide shows that this approach has been called as a sustainability for sustainability. Next slide, please. So it is called as circles of sustainability, where it's a method to assess the social sustainability, and several global organizations are using it, including United Nations. Now, in this, Delhi and Hyderabad were part of from our country. I'm not happy with the level of green being seen there. It's quite disheartening. In every aspect, let it be economics, let it be culture, politics, and ecology, they are all interlinked. But if you see Melbourne, which tops the list, even there, ecology is at the back foot, which is quite disheartening. Even though these countries, westernized countries, are progressing well, but there also, ecology still is the back foot. Something has to be done at this level, and I'm pretty sure the humans are resilient, and probably this pandemic has shown that even if we have a lockdown, I know it has a huge economic impact. In 15 days, people at Jalandhar were able to see the mountain ranges, which they say have not seen for decades. Next slide, please. So we have talked about individual as well as a community level. Now, when we talk about region or a country's measure is being done in terms of GDP, which is gross domestic product. But we lack social and environmental indicators to tell how good is the country's well-being. Next slide tells there are alternatives to do it, which incorporates one or the other factors, but then there is a complexity because at a higher level you are able to control or gauge it. But when you go to the nuances of city and a particular region, how are you going to estimate? People are working towards it, and I hope in a decade's time the modification or changes will be there, and we will be having different measure for well-being. Next slide, please. So one of the approach I'm emphasizing that has to be at the medical level is comparative medicine. In 1858, remember 1858, we are talking about which century, right? Professor Rodolphe Virchow, who's father of modern pathology, said that between animal and human medicine, there are no dividing lines, nor should there be. The object is different, but the experience obtained constitutes the basis of all medicines. I know comparative medicine is a subject taught to veterinarians who take care of the animals, but there are very few medical institutes which have a component on comparative medicine. It's the right time to emphasize comparative medicine as one in connecting between these two medical institutions or the way that teaching is being done. And who knows, in coming future, there might be an hospital saying that we are a comparative medicine. And whenever you have a pet and you want to have a check analysis of any infection has happened, there you have consulting with both medical doctors as well as veterinarians as one. Next slide. Having the health aspect being there, all we have to understand is also the data which we get from these comparative medicines had to be analyzed along with comparative genomics. Right now, what I'm showing you is orthologous genes shared between human, mouse, chicken, as well as zebrafish, all vertebrate models. And you see 18,402 orthologs of humans are there. And interestingly, all the colored ones for mouse, chicken, and zebrafish are actually present in humans. So what is distinct about us? We are just distinct by 16% at the genomic level. We have been using animal models to do a drug discovery and testing, and we cannot deny that there are several drugs which have been in usage and outcome, a compassionate outcome through the industry, but we want more and more integration of it. We have to reduce the number of animals used in the drug discovery, and we have to understand that we have to have a system where we use information coming from all these organisms and then extrapolate it to humans. It's a long journey, and fortunately, I'm using zebrafish as a model organism, and zebrafish also can be having diabetes, heart diseases, and they also get infected with mycobacterium. And that is one reason I started this company called as Genofi Biotech. Next slide, please. So next slide emphasizes what was the journey of us as humans from nomads to farming. The sustainability footprint was good. But the moment we settled in one place, we started to have agriculture and animals being domesticated. We started to have an impact which was able to be sustained by the environmental sink. But then fire, wheel, electricity, and industrial revolution gave us two products, non-biodegradable products, glass, plastic. Now we have to understand that these can be recycled, but people have to put effort from their own side. It's not government's responsibility, it is our responsibility to take care of it. Single use, even at water level, is very critical for us. Yeah. Next slide. With that, I will conclude by putting ourselves in this particular location, which is Dhauli in Orissa, and there is a small spot which you see as River Daya. This is a place where Ashoka stood after the Kalinga War, and he thought, what I did. And believe me, after that, our country came into a existence with peace with each other. To some extent, I'm not just extrapolating it, but to some extent. Now we have to put ourselves in that given condition, each one of us looking towards this beautiful image of Earth taken by a Russian satellite. And we have to see what we have done, what we can do next to be sustainable. And we are taking this call at 11th hour. Is this sufficient? I leave it upon the next generation. Each one who is listening or watching, make it a point that you do one change in your life per month and then assess in your 12th month. It is going to be contributing for the welfare of the future. You are the future. Thanks a lot for the opportunity given to me. So Mitroji, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Srinath Tirunilakanthan. I think you made an excellent presentation depicting both global and local perspectives. A lot of very important messages were shared in a very sentimental, I felt, and also emotional manner. A couple of statements that have stayed with me is that how parenting and education is so important right from the childhood level to ensure that we actually taking care of the environment becomes our habit, a force of habit, as opposed to learning the same as we're growing. And the second statement that reminds with me is what you quoted, Dr. Rudolf Virchow. Back in 1858, he realized, he was the father of modern pathology. He realized at that time itself, saying that between animal and human medicine, there are no dividing lines, nor there should be. That says a lot. So thank you so much. I hope the listeners have listened to you and hope they will start practicing some of the good messages that you've given. With that, now I would like to invite the next speaker, Professor Utpal Tatu, whom I know for quite a few years, is currently in the Division of Biological Sciences, Institute of Science of Bengaluru. He's also founder and director of Equine Biotech Labs, an organization enabled by Institute of Science. He's a celebrated professor at the IAC, and also, very importantly, a social entrepreneur. He did his postdoctoral research at Yale School of Medicine, New Haven, Connecticut, USA. He's noted for research into neglected and emerging, I repeat again, emerging infectious diseases with a focus to develop better treatments and better diagnostic solutions, rapid diagnostic solutions. His research interests include human and animal infections with One Health concept, ongoing research on amoebiosis, babesiosis, candidiasis, cryptococcosis, giardiasis, rabies, trichomonosis, and trypanosomosis. Most notably, he has developed, this is something that we all should be proud of, he's developed diagnostic solutions for antemortem diagnosis of rabies and point of care diagnosis for trypanosomosis, and most recently for COVID-19, which is endorsed by Indian Council for Medical Research. He has received numerous accolades, and the number of awards are quite too many to start listing them. He's a elected member of the Fellow of the Indian Academy of Sciences. With over 2 decades of experience in global health, he continues to implement his research expertise to improve human and animal health with a social entrepreneurial initiative, a company called Equine Biotech Labs. And his whole aim is to improve and develop diagnostic and therapeutic ways for zoonotic infections. With that short introduction, I would like to introduce you a global health expert, Professor Utpal Tatu. Over to you, Professor Utpal Tatu. You're muted, Utpal. Unmute, please unmute. Unmute.
Okay, got it. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Dr. Mittur, for your very kind introduction. Thank you, Biotechnica, for putting together this nice program on such an important topic on One Health. I think it's been a feast since morning, I think, listening to Dr. Mittur first as an introductory person, and then Dr. Srinath. And here I am now talking to you about some of my personal experiences and my own interventions in the One Health area. What I'm going to do is to give you some case studies of what a researcher and a scientist can do in this rapidly emerging and area that people are beginning to acknowledge as an important one for the future of our planet and future of mankind and future of living beings all together. So yes, the title of my talk is One Health Initiative in my lab at Indian Institute of Science. The first slide, actually the backdrop of my title slide, actually shows you the campus, Indian Institute of Science. Many of you students and researchers have definitely had some sort of experience at IISc in one form or the other. You may have visited, but you are most welcome to visit. Here's our central building in the heart of the campus, and scattered around it are academic building departments, and my own laboratory is at the north end of the campus. I hope to see more students at one point or the other in the times to come to visit when they visit Indians of Science. What I'm going to do today in the next 15, 20 or 25 minutes is to give you a sort of a narrative, really, a narrative about the journey of a scientist like me who has been researching on infectious diseases for now more than a decade, how my interests evolved from infectious disease to now animal disease and then One Health, and how it's really a natural evolution of interests as the problems in the community have grown, and what I have noticed. So here in the first slide, I'm just showing you a trajectory that we have followed in my laboratory at Indian Institute of Science. When I started my research at Indian Institute of Science as a faculty, now it's almost 24 years, I came back from Yale University after my postdoctoral experience, and decided to start a new research program. When I came to India, I thought I will not continue what I did in the US. I will do something that's relevant for my country and for the problems that our community is facing in India. And when I looked around at that time, there were a lot of infectious diseases that were talked about, that people were suffering from. And I thought I should focus my research attention on one of those topics. So early on, I started thinking about most common infectious diseases at that time, such as malaria. So really, I started working on Plasmodium falciparum. And although malaria is not truly zoonotic, but yes, some species of Plasmodium do infect animals. And there is an equivalent of malaria in animals. But at that time, my interest was predominantly on malaria. And over the years, as my research progressed and as we established the research laboratory, I kept looking around to see where else I can contribute. And then from one to the other, I kept adding list of diseases to research in my laboratory. So over the years now, we have more than 15 different infectious diseases that are being researched in my lab, and all of them are broadly classified as neglected diseases or emerging infectious diseases. I would like to take a moment to talk about that. The diseases that are called neglected diseases are diseases which are prevalent in developing nations like India and also underdeveloped nations such as parts of Africa. And the reason they are called neglected is not because they are neglected by researchers, but because pharma companies which make drugs or vaccines or also sometimes diagnostic products, they have neglected these important diseases. Again, they are not neglected because they are very rare or uncommon. In fact, if anything, these diseases are present, they infect and they affect large population on our earth, because the populations in developing and underdeveloped nations is really large. So they in fact affect larger numbers of a population in the world, but they're neglected because there is no economic benefit in developing solutions for these problems, for the reason that in developing countries and underdeveloped nations, people cannot afford expensive medicine, expensive diagnostic solutions, and expensive vaccines. As a result, these diseases have not attracted attention from pharma companies, and then there are no obvious solutions in terms of diagnosis, in terms of treatment, or in terms of prevention by vaccination. And the list of diseases is long, and WHO, and that is World Health Organization and World Animal Health Organizations, have listed priority neglected infectious diseases, and those are the ones that I am working on. The list is rather large, and some of them, of course, infect animals as well as humans, and some which are not listed here are zoonotic, as I will share with you in the next few minutes. So as a trajectory of a researcher such as me, who starts a research program in India when given an opportunity back in mid-90s, when I came back to India, I decided that I will do research on some of these infections. And that's, of course, as a professor, then one does basic science research using multidisciplinary approaches and publishes papers, which is the main goal of academic scientists and for academic background. Over the years, then I realized that my research does not have sufficient impact in the field. Only few scientific peers are reading my manuscripts, and it's limited to the academic community. And that's when I decided that I must also make an effort to reach out in the field. So from basic understanding about pathogens, I decided that I will collaborate with clinicians in the field and also veterinary doctors in the field who see the real infections. And I started working on clinical aspects of infectious using big data science, such as next generation sequencing and other omic approaches, such as proteomics, metabolomics, and bioinformatics. It was such an enriching experience that now there are large number of diseases that we have examined using clinical samples coming from the field, coming from infected animals, coming from infected humans, and we have developed very interesting, deep understanding about what is going on in these infections. Most recently now, our laboratory has gone on to develop actual products. We have decided that we will not limit only to academic or clinical research, but we'll go out and find solutions. And that's how, as Dr. Mittur mentioned, we developed a social entrepreneurship initiative out of Indian Institute of Science, wherein we are developing diagnostic tools and drugs for improvement of these neglected and infectious diseases. So that's really where I'm coming from. And I'm going to share with you today some of those excitements that we have had in this broad area of neglected, emerging infectious diseases, as well as One Health. Now, Dr. Srinath has done a wonderful job earlier today, before my talk, in introducing to you what is One Health, Lokakshema. And he has given you a wonderful background about how the approach has to incorporate not just human health, but animal health and our environment. So I will not spend more time on introducing the topic. And I will move on, of course, in today's talk to the main topic that I'm going to talk to you about. I will spare the first 2 points. I've already introduced to you what are neglected diseases. And I think you have better appreciation that all the common diseases that are around us are in fact neglected. And the reason they continue to be present and lots of humans are dying is because there's not enough solutions available to take care of these diseases. And some of them are now turning into One Health problems. Dr. Srinath and Dr. Mittur highlighted some of the infections in their introduction and talk. One of them they talked about was rabies, that it is one health problem which has caused the most economic damage all over the world. I'm going to share with you today some specific case studies of what, as a research laboratory at IISc, what are we trying to do? As social entrepreneurs, what are we trying to do in the area of rabies? And then I'll touch upon another infectious disease, which is of One Health background, which is called toxoplasmosis. Again, in the area, we are doing some work there. And finally, in my talk, I'll talk to you about COVID-19, which is, again, an example that's staring at our face as we speak. It is challenging the human community. That is COVID-19. So I'm going to show you some examples of this. But just before I start, I will just summarize some of the infectious agents that we have worked on in the past, which included protozoan infections. Many of them, in fact, are exemplified as One Health problems because they have jumped species barrier from humans to animals. And then infections such as Giardia and Amoeba, which continue to be zoonotic, being transmitted from animals to human and back, vice versa. And then emerging drug-resistant infectious agents such as Candida, which actually have now new species that our laboratory identified by name Candida auris, which is multi-drug resistant, and then other animal infections that I'll have some time to talk about. The only point that I'll re-emphasize, which was talked nicely earlier today, was that if you think about it, majority of infections that we see around us, in fact, arise from animals. The data that is there in front of us suggests that more than 70% of human infections actually come from animals. So it's not something that you have to be very creative and smart in thinking. It's very basic logic that we really have to look after other beings besides human beings, animals, and then also plants, and then also birds, to make sure that human health is preserved and human race continues to proliferate on this planet. And that's what is emphasized in this slide, that in fact, it's altogether a common problem. And the list of diseases which are transmitted, again, I have shared with you, but here are some more. Rabies really remains at the top, and I'm going to share with you a case study about what we are trying to do in this. If I ask young people today, some of them may be in the audience, and some of them are maybe listen to this talk in the form of a recording. What are the most common infections that you are aware of? And you will come up with, of course, COVID-19, which we are going through, but then you'll think about influenza, you'll think about avian influenza, swine influenza, you'll think about Zika, you'll think about Nipah Valley virus, you'll think about Ebola. All of these you've heard, even though you may not be a science student, you've read about it in newspapers, you've seen it on WhatsApp, and you've probably seen it on the television. I must remind you that all of these actually have emanated from either animals or birds. Take the example of avian influenza, which came from birds. Middle East respiratory syndrome virus, which came from camels. SARS, a version of SARS, which came from bat. Swine flu, that came from swine, pigs, and then so on. All of these diseases have arisen from. And so there's a list. In the last 10 years, last 10 to 15 years, these are the diseases which have made headlines because of large number of human beings that suffered and many who died because of this. They really challenged the mankind. They really challenged the humanity that, look, viruses can wipe out the earth, we can wipe out human race. It's a distinct possibility, not just a science fiction as we have seen in movies and in books. And COVID-19 is a glaring example of what's going on. I'm going to show it to you today that with this awareness that the diseases are coming closer to humans, they're coming closer to humans as animals are coming closer to humans in an undesirable manner, in a manner that humans are not looking after. They are only being selfish in looking after the way they are interacting with animals. This is what I'm going to share with you in the next few minutes. Around this time, our research on diseases such as trypanosoma made headlines in magazines such as Nature Medicine. Nature Medicine carried a research profile of the research that we done on trypanosoma in animals, because at that time, way back in 2011, we were working on trypanosomosis of animals, and particularly at that time, there was an outbreak of trypanosomosis in horses in India. And we controlled that and find a remedy for it. We developed new drugs for it. And that story was covered in Nature Medicine. And that really was the first time that I realized that looking at animal health is going to be very rewarding. So, of course, our research was going on even before year 2000 in this area, but it came to limelight, and then Nature carried these pictures of me working with a sick horse, and then my colleagues all over the world working in their laboratories, following up on some of the observations that we had made. And that really gave us a lot of emphasis that, look, we are on the right path. And then about 5 or 7 years ago, we founded this our social entrepreneurship that actually focuses on One Health. And this is the website for it, wherein we use multiple approaches of looking at the environment, looking at the animals, looking at humans, and apply science to understand how we can help. This was actually an initiative out of Indian Institute of Science. Our former director, Professor Padmanabhan, inaugurated and this platform, which Dr. Mittur mentioned, and through which now we are able to reach the community. We are actually able to do interventions in preventing animals from dying from diseases that we don't understand, preventing infections emanating from animals and coming into humans at large numbers. How are we doing it? And this is what I will share with you in the next 15 minutes. I will start with the example of rabies. Dr. Srinath emphasized in the statistics that he showed that rabies is the single disease that has the major economic damage all over the world, one of the most transmissible. And remember, rabies is almost always fatal. So rabies is also a virus like COVID-19, very similar, also an RNA virus. I'll not go into the technicalities, but I'll tell you that rabies is, why hasn't rabies become such a big problem like COVID-19 has become? The reason is that rabies spread is not as fast as COVID-19 is spreading. COVID-19 is spreading much more rapidly because it has found a way to transmit in a sort of unparalleled manner. But the number of fatalities that COVID-19 causes is much fewer than rabies. Rabies is 100% fatal. Every individual, be it animal or human, that gets rabies will die sooner or later. In COVID-19, the fatality rates are different in different parts of the world, as you know. But then why has rabies not attracted so much attention? People are not even aware that even today, in countries like India, even in our own cities, people are dying of rabies, except that the numbers are not as large as we are witnessing for COVID-19. But hey, I want to remind you that it's possible that we are sitting on a time bomb. This may become a major threat for human beings in future if we don't act at the right manner. And I want to remind our listeners of some of the key facets of rabies. All of you are aware that rabies can be transmitted when an infected dog bites, or a rabid dog bites a human being. And we have lots of stray dogs. And I think you know that in our panel today, we have some wonderful social workers, Ms. Sujaya and Ms. Navina, who are doing such wonderful work in looking after stray animals and keeping them healthy. They are putting their own finances, they are putting their time in this selfless manner to take care of stray animals. And this again relates back to diseases such as rabies, because they are the ones who notice when an animal is sick on the street. Nobody's going to notice this unless there are people like Ms. Sujaya and Ms. Navina who go out there in the field and are monitoring at least some numbers of animals that they have access to. And I think we need more volunteers like this in our country. And I hope this will become something that they will become ambassadors of looking after animals. But coming back to rabies, rabies infects dogs. How does it infect dogs? It infects from another infected animal. It could be a wild animal, or it could be another fellow dog, or even a cat. Any infectious agent can cause. And there is a reservoir of rabies virus somewhere in the wild. We don't fully understand, and it's a subject matter in itself in which I'm doing a lot of research and understanding what are the hotspots and reservoirs of the virus. But today I want to just focus on what is the intervention we are able to do. What is the way by which we are actually able to curtail this problem around us in a real-time manner? As I said, rabies is all over the world, and that's what this slide shows you, emphasizes that there is no part in the world where rabies hasn't. And all kinds of animals, being fox, Arctic fox, skunks, wolves, and bats, jackals, cats, dogs can transmit rabies. And through the infection, through the bite of a dog, it enters our bloodstream, and then through neurons, through the axonal transport, it finds its way to the brain. It finds its way to the brain, and then in a matter of few weeks, the infected animal, human, can die. The infected animal also dies eventually. And that's really where the big problem is, and we don't have a way to monitor in animals. Unless the animal dies, we don't know clearly if it had the rabies. I'll skip this slide because I repeated that. But if you think about how do people find out whether an animal is rabid or not? Well, the sad news is that most of the times we find out that the animal was rabid only after it has died. Today, we are lacking in efficient diagnostic tests which will tell you a person that the animal has rabies even at an early stage. So the most common test is actually rapid fluorescent focus inhibition test and direct fluorescent antibody test, which actually work through post-mortem brain sample. And then the people look at this, of course, some of these laboratory-based tests, and then also histochemistry to see Negri bodies in the brain, which is an indicator that this particular dog had rabies virus infection. But that's too late, because by then that dog may have bitten others, it may have transmitted infection, it may have bitten humans also. What we have done is to develop a molecular test for rabies virus, which catches rabies infection at a very early stage, even when the dog does not have full-fledged symptoms of rabies. I will not emphasize the clinical aspects of rabies. I mean, they are very simple. All of you know that rabies, rabid dogs actually have tendency to bite, they have tendency to bark, they hate water. The moment they try to drink water, they will vomit, and many other symptoms which are very. But before that, it is in the saliva of this dog that some particles of virus may be present. And exploiting that part, we have developed a molecular test which just uses a few drops of the saliva and uses molecular diagnosis by a protocol that we have standardized using, and that then helps you to get. Because many of you are students, we develop very specific primers which are very unique, and in such a manner we have done it that even 1 or 2 particles of rabies virus we can find. So even a completely asymptomatic dog, we can actually, if anybody has any suspicion, we can actually test. And I'm showing you the result of a test that is commonly done in our laboratory, because some of you may be intrigued by it. Many of the samples that you see here are brain samples from dead dogs who had rabies and they died. And then in the veterinary college, they did post-mortem and sent us the sample. But here is the molecular weight markers and a particular amplicon indicative of the presence of rabies virus through polymerase chain reaction. And you'll see that sample number 7 was from a dog which had suspicion of getting rabies virus, but from the saliva, we could confirm that indeed it has signature of the rabies virus and it needs to be isolated. So now what have we done by doing this? We are doing it day in and day out. Samples are being sent to us and we are able to do rabies diagnosis. What have we done? We haven't been able to help that dog, because that dog, if it has rabies, it will definitely die. But what we have done is to caution the dog owner or the social worker who has brought the stray dog sample to us, because that dog needs to be isolated. And now immediately that will be done, because you quarantine that dog. Although the dog itself may die, but you prevent the chance of the rabies virus spreading to other animals or the dog biting other animals. And thereby you prevent loss of other lives. That's really the advantage of doing this ante-mortem saliva test of rabies, which we are routinely doing in the lab. And this manner, we are actually astounded at how many people, so many people all around India, have scare of rabies, and we are getting large number of people approaching us to do rabies test in the saliva, and many of them without any obvious symptoms. And in few of those cases, the test actually turns positive. And that's something that, and then of course we are involved in full-fledged research because we are doing proteomics, big data science of rabies to develop even better tests, even better biomarkers. Having talked a little bit about rabies, and let me turn my attention, to another disease which is less commonly heard about, but it is present in India. Remember, I will make this comment here that we talk about certain diseases which are often, there is awareness about it because there is international awareness and then there is awareness in India. But there are many other diseases for which we are not, there's no awareness. People don't talk about it in the press, but they are around. There are many examples. Well, toxoplasmosis is not very uncommon and not unheard of, but I'm sure many of the students who are listening here may be listening to this for the first time. Toxoplasmosis is another example of an infection that is spread from animals to humans and vice versa. It's again it's not virus, it's a protozoan infection like malaria in terms of its phylogeny, but it actually causes anorexia, lethargy, depression, fever, weight loss, etc. in animals. Very common, and I'm sure the social worker who have joined us today are aware of this toxoplasma infection, very commonly present, not always fatal, but it can cause morbidity, and more importantly, it can be passed on to humans. I will not spend too much time talking about the life cycle, but yes, it can be transmitted from feces of cats and dogs, typically cats. Cats are more susceptible to toxoplasma, this particular species, Toxoplasma gondii. But what I want to emphasize is that through animals, it can find its way through food into humans, but women, and especially pregnant women, are particularly susceptible to toxoplasmosis, and then their fetus can actually suffer and die because of toxoplasmosis. So this is a particular health hazard for pregnant women, and there've been many cases. But even for human men, this is a definitive problem, but more commonly in women. So if you have a pet cat or a pet dog, you must always monitor this disinfection through various possibilities that are available to you. I want to just touch upon a fascinating aspect of toxoplasmosis. Toxoplasmosis, like rabies, can also be neurological. It can affect your brain, but rabies is almost always fatal. Toxo does not always lead to death. It can, but it doesn't always, but it causes a lot of morbidity. But more importantly, it in fact affects your brain in a horrifying manner. Oftentimes, neurological effects of toxo are compared with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It actually produces, secretory proteins in the brain that affect neurological function. And there's a lot of research being done on how it affects the brain. What are the components of toxoplasma? How does it reach the brain? All of these are being researched, and some of it being done in my own lab. I won't have time to share with you. But eating uncooked meat could be one way by which, of course, this can transmit. So the point that I want to come to you today, and this is a take home, remember, I am an academician, but now I have developed tremendous respect that, look, just doing science in the lab and publishing papers is not enough. It is important to communicate science and also make sure that the science reaches outside in the community. And together with the help of social leaders such as Sujaya, Navina, and Dr. Jagdish, who has seen both sides, the science part of it, as well as the social part of applying science, we are able to do actually interventions in the community. What I want to emphasize here is that, in human illness, there is so much awareness. The sophistication of technology is unparalleled. Today, what is it that we cannot do in human illness? Everything. There are fantastic set of doctors, and there are fantastic set of lab diagnostic tools available. And then based on the test results, doctor will prescribe treatment. But look what's happened in the animal world. Animal world, illnesses are even more common. Yes, we do have some fantastic veterinary doctors, but to back them up, lab diagnosis is lacking. It's only ill explored because most of the times we have only standard tests of blood count and some basic tests, liver tests and kidney tests, very basic parameters. And oftentimes there are labs which use the human clinical laboratories for such purpose. What we have done as scientists is to try and fill this gap. As I mentioned, we have developed a platform where we are now applying sophisticated technologies to do animal health diagnosis. through Indian Institute of Science, social entrepreneurship that I've already talked to you about. And some of the research that I talked to you is now available. I'll give you example of rabies, toxoplasmosis, and that has now affected the community. It has saved lives, and we are so happy. One animal at a time. What a tremendous satisfaction it is for us to make a small difference through the work that we have done. I will skip this slide, but it emphasizes what Dr. Srinath has mentioned, that animal diseases are actually a huge burden on any economy, but particularly Indian economy. And that is, of course, there are numbers available. In the last few minutes that I have, I'm going to talk to you about my work with COVID-19. Many of us actually forget that COVID-19 is actually an infection that has emerged from bats. In fact, as we are so busy tackling the problem of COVID, most people, in fact, need to be reminded that this infection came from a bat. And there was some controversy that this could also be there in animals. It's an ongoing, every day I get a call that, can you test my dog for COVID-19? Can you test my cat for COVID-19? Because there are reports elsewhere in the world that animals can get COVID-19. Of course, it came from bat. And earlier, Dr. Srinath nicely mentioned that minks have contracted this from human beings. And there is a sort of, shuttling of virus between humans and minks happening in parts of Europe, Netherlands, and then he talked about Denmark, where they've decided to cull minks. What a tragedy it is. But even then in India, no awareness about potential of animals contracting COVID-19. Luckily, we have not seen many cases so far, but it is a potential threat. But I want to share with you a secret that very few people know. My laboratory, through the engagement that we have had with animal health, has been doing coronavirus infection diagnosis for last several years, even before the world had heard of COVID-19. We were doing common tests for coronavirus in cats and dogs and horses, because these are common infections in these animals, in companion animals as well as in agriculture animals. They are not always fatal. Coronavirus infections don't always cause fatality. They are mild infections, sometimes causing diarrhea, sometimes other symptoms. And for the last several years, we have been offering tests, and lots of people have made use of it. Suddenly in January, then we heard about Wuhan COVID-19 outbreak coming from bats. We already had a test with us, already, even before people thought about it. And in fact, we quickly adapted it for human testing, and all of you are aware of the RT-PCR based test. I will not belabor this point. It's all newspaper information, but I want to remind people that this is an example of One Health. Feline infectious peritonitis is caused by coronavirus, which we were working extensively on, and we continue to work on as we speak now. This is an infection that can cause fatality in cats. It causes accumulation of fluid around the abdomen, and this is really where we made a small difference. This is a sort of a scientific phylogenetic chart slide that shows you that human COVID-19 is in fact close to bats, that virus. And then again, if you see the distance from equine coronavirus, bovine coronavirus, feline coronavirus, swine corona, and canine is not too far. There is more than 90% similarity between coronavirus that infects animals and humans. So it won't be a shock to hear that COVID-19 can happen in animals, and maybe, I hope it doesn't, but scientifically something that we should be aware. I'll not emphasize this point, but we are actually 5 years ago, we all started offering RT-PCR based tests for coronavirus in animals. Last few months, of course, we are heavily into it, and we have embarked into deep research into COVID-19 through big data science. I just want to show you that this is, being a One Health problem, we sequenced many of the COVID-19 isolates from patients, human patients in India, and tried to examine how close is it to the animal infection, and especially the coronavirus that we find in India, and through animals. And that data is all available. It's now going to appear in press. But I want to show you that this is something that's very fascinating, that the viruses circulating in India, some of them actually came from neighboring countries and then from Europe. This is the scientific outcome of our test, our research. And oftentimes we are actually fortunate that in such opportunities we are able to make some contribution. And some of you have heard about this, that we through the experience that we had in COVID-19 testing, we were actually able to develop a test which is now approved by ICMR, COVID-19 diagnostic test, which is now commonly used for human COVID-19. But we are also working on COVID-19 rapid tests, which can be done at home, and that is another outcome of the research that we have done in the lab, and hopefully it will be launched in the months to come. Finally, I want to spend a minute and come back to what the points that Dr. Srinath emphasized, Dr. Mittur emphasized, and then after me, Ms. Sujaya and Navina will actually share even their common experiences in day-to-day life. What has the pandemic taught us? Number one, that don't neglect surroundings, environment around you. Animal health, plant health, clean environment, hygienic environment. Those are the most obvious take homes for all of us. But also it has taught us that there is, even before an animal infection becomes zoonotic, because remember, the diseases that we learned in and which are described in textbooks, they haven't remained the same. That textbook knowledge has now changed. Many of the viruses are mutated and come out in a new form. And this is constantly happening. There are new viruses being brewing in nature currently as we speak, and we need to be ready. The awareness must spread, and this is what I think this platform today that Biotechnica is offering attempts to do, to create awareness about the future problems that we may have, and currently how to deal with the ongoing pandemic is something that I think also needs to be thought about. But challenging human race by microorganisms is not science fiction anymore. There was a possibility earlier this year that significant number of human beings on this planet will be lost because of COVID-19. We have already lost. Luckily, the death toll was not so high in India and other parts of the world. But this is a thought that crossed every human being's mind, that infections can challenge. It's not unthinkable that human race can be wiped out in future if we do not act now. And with this statement, I want to end my presentation. I want to thank the platform all again for providing me this opportunity to reach out to the community. And it's wonderful to be associated with all of you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Professor Utpal Tatu. You've touched upon the actual work that needs to be done if we're going to be serious about controlling the next set of emerging diseases, and also touched upon what is it we should do with the diseases that have been prevailing. So I want to mention to the audience that here is an academic who could have convened to stay back in the USA after his postdoc in Yale University, but his nature didn't allow him to do so. He returned to India because India is a gold mine of diseases. So what will he do in a country like US or North Europe or wherever it is? So here is addressing several different diseases that are prevalent in the society all over India, maybe other parts of South Asia. And with this focus on rabies and toxoplasmosis and other diseases, I'm sure that the test kits that are coming out of his lab, either through Equine Biotech or through his own IAC lab, are helping diagnose diseases early enough so that the spread of the same disease can be prevented. Dr. Tatu, we really want to congratulate you for releasing COVID-19 test kit that has been approved by ICMR. I think this is going to make a huge difference in terms of early diagnosis and prevention of further spread. And I think I want audience to remember what he mentioned at the end, that challenging human race by a microbe is not a science fiction. Unfortunately, we had to wait till COVID to wake us up, although we had indications of such kind earlier on through Zika, through Ebola, through avian influenza and whatnot. It's just that our lazy attitude has ignored them, apart from a few like you who have been working on such diseases. So thank you so much. I now would like to invite the two people who have been instrumental in addressing some of the issues that we have on the streets, on the ground of India, particularly with focus on Bangalore, and what is that they can do in terms of through education, through whatever. So we have Ms. Navina Kamath, who is affiliated to Action for Animal Justice, and we have Ms. Sujaya Jagdish, who is associate for SOAT, which is Save Our Animal Charity Trust. I first would like to invite Ms. Navina Kamath to say a few words on exactly what to do, and then followed by Sujaya, what she does, and then we can minute for questions. Over to Navina, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be part of this group today, and I would like to thank the organizers for facilitating a very interesting and fascinating discussion on infections and zoonosis, and also the threats faced by mankind in general as we step into the next decade. I'm an ecologist by training, but my passion has been animals, wildlife, and also domestic animals. And we've tried consistently in the past decade to bring an awareness into the public fold about the contributions, tangible and intangible, that these animals have made to our societies, our primitive societies, hunter gatherer societies, as was mentioned before, and now in the post industrial era. The challenges we are facing because of the lack of recognition of the history of our association with these animals, our symbiotic dependence, and the fact that today we can be a lot more healthy if we look at them as equal partners and not just as creatures to exploit. I would be happy to take questions later after my close friend Sujya has finished her introduction also. We look forward to a continuation of the session. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, first of all, to Biotechnica for having Navina and myself as panelists. It's an honor. And what fantastic talks, absolutely making such close connections between the human and animal health, which is so important for all of us to recognize. As I'm told, I was told that, just give a small introduction. I represent SWAC, Save Our Animals Charitable Trust, SWAC. I've been in the animal welfare rescue sort of work for the past 15 plus years. So what SWAC does is, we don't, first of all, I must tell you that I do not run a shelter. What we do is rescue animals as and when we see them on the street, helpless, waiting for someone to help. Maybe it could be accident cases. Maybe they have fallen down because they've contacted some disease and they cannot even get up and help themselves. So these are the animals that need our help, humans to help them. So what we do is we pick up these cases and we connect with hospitals, with NGOs, with shelters, and even private clinics. They help us to get treatment done for these animals, and once the animals feel better, we put them back where we picked them up from. So this is how we can we involve ourselves. Secondly, what we do is we feed animals, the street dogs mainly. We vaccinate them, we keep a general check on their health, and get help whenever they're required. Another thing that SWAC does is also reach out to schools to build awareness program to children, because that's where the future lies. We need to touch the young hearts and make a difference to our society. Another thing that SWAC does is also reach out to villages where there's absolutely no help for small animals. Large animals are taken care of, but small animals desperately need help. So we do conduct ABC camps, this animal birth control camps, for which way of cutting down on dog population. And we do also treatment and reach out to schools also in villages and talk to villagers and educate them on how they can help animals. So apart from that, a few points come to my mind that I want to really share with the public who are listening to us today as an animal welfarist. Dog, specifically in our Bangalore or outside Bangalore, it's an issue. Obviously, it is an issue, and we all need to actually help out to do something about this issue. BBMP is right now conducting a program in the BBMP areas called the Animal Birth Control Program, ABC for short. And NGOs all around Bangalore are picking up dogs for sterilization. And then after 3 days, these dogs are released back in the same area that they are picked. So what we need here is we need volunteers. We need volunteers from all these areas to coordinate with the NGOs that are picking up these dogs, make sure the dogs are sterilized and brought back to their area, and then do a little follow-up until they can get up on their own feet and fend for themselves. Once they have gone through this program of animal birth control, they are also vaccinated for rabies. And once they're back on the street, they live their life out till the natural end. So, and that's the basic we can do, just look after them until they recover from surgeries. That is one thing. Secondly, adoptions. We have plenty of indie dogs, small puppies on the street. Why don't we, as responsible citizens, adopt one puppy off the street? You will be doing a fantastic job. You'll be really doing us a favor, everyone a favor, the community a favor by adopting a puppy. And our Indian puppies are as loving, as giving, as cute and whatever, as any pedigree dogs. By adopting puppies off the street, or even abandoned dogs, for that matter, we are in a great way carrying out our responsibilities towards animals. So that's another thing. And thirdly, talk to your children, like Dr. Srinath said, parenting, instill compassion in them, and that's where, children, if they grow up as responsible citizens, show compassion towards animals, believe me, they'll grow up to be such great human beings that, they will even, probably, be, good enough to, take care of their future generation and pass on in good ethics to the next generation. And one more thing is, education through schools. So, I am, and along with some of my volunteer friends, we are going to schools in Bangalore. We talk to children, we sensitize them, and that is the need of the hour. We really need to sensitize children in animal welfare and compassion. And last but not the least, a very important point is we need cooperation from authorities. Animal Welfare Board of India, State Welfare Board of India, and even the police for that matter. All of them have to chip in at times of need. There are a lot of cruelty cases that we come across as welfare workers, animal welfare workers, and many a times we are left high and dry without any help from authorities. So, we really look forward to, help from authorities going forward. And please volunteer. And if you are really interested and want to do something about this issue, please send in your numbers and, let's take it forward as a team. Thank you.
So much, Sujay and Navina. I'm going to be opening up for a few questions. We may have a few minutes. I know we are running over time, but it's been a fantastic sharing of knowledge by scientists as well as animal welfare folks. I have a question that has come in. I would like to have Shekhar. Yeah, he's also on the panel here. So a couple of questions from my side, and if Shekhar can pick up some questions from the other audience, then we can go forward. The first question is for Dr. Srinath. So you mentioned a lot about the global view and the local view, but what about a person like me or a person like somebody, like a common man or common woman, young or old? What is that he or she can do on a day-to-day basis from your perspective to contribute to the sustainability of the environment?
Right. So whoever asked this question, I'm very thankful for that because I have been adhering to few of the things as ethics, as Sujaya mentioned. One of the ethic is that much before the pandemic happened, for past 2 years, I am not discarding any wet waste into the BBMP tank. That is one contribution according to me. I live in a 700 square foot small apartment, but I don't discard the wet waste. I'm making compost of it. And by doing that, there are two things. I'm getting compost for my own plants, and then I'm not putting burden on an entity like BBMP, right? We have to understand, we have to inculcate these kind of things. Nowadays, YouTube has so many information how you can sustain on your own. You should do your own part. Second is that as a citizen, those 30 seconds at a signal, traffic signal, you just turn off your vehicle, right? In olden days, when I used to be at college, we used to kickstart. But nowadays, it is just a button. All you have to see is to wait for the yellow signal light to turn on and then start it. Because statistically, the amount of petrol burnt by a kickstart is for 30 seconds. Now by button, it is not even 5 seconds. We can contribute for that 30 seconds because most of our day life we spend on the traffic. We can have some kind of understanding in this aspect. That is my perspective as a citizen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shekhar, you have a question from the audience?
Yes, so I can see questions coming in. Okay, here we go. So we have a question: how to become the member of a specific organization?
How to become a member of the NGO organizations? They can send information. We can share with you the numbers of both organizations as well as the numbers of the institutions working on zoonotic diseases, and they can take it forward. I have a question for Professor Tatu from Dr. A.K. Sham. So, Utpal, the question is, can we predict the future warnings based on the data compiled so far so that we are better prepared next time around?
Yes, we can attempt to do that, and we are trying to do that. So the way to do that is to look at the data on infectious diseases from last several years, and which is what we have done. We're kind of doing statistical analysis of which infections are most common among animals, and then looking at in which parts of India, which parts of and what socioeconomic strata in terms of pet owners and that the diseases are common. We've done a lot of this analysis. This is just as an example, and that is helping us to examine which are the animals which are predisposed and to what infection. Now, some of these infections are zoonotic, and as a result, we are able to actually remain prepared that in this part of the world, in this part of India, in this part of Bangalore, there is more of this particular disease, and the parents and that's pet parents and a community needs to be informed. And for example, also in rabies, we have some data out there. So that's the way to better predict and be prepared. So really, the preparedness starts several years. It actually, the foundation lies in several years of work. We can't sort of do alarming or raise an alarm just by doing a few months of work. That is already too late, actually.
All right, thank you. Navina, I have a question for you. Basically, is a question composed by a few comments that I've been gathering here. So I know you're doing a lot of work in the streets of Bengaluru and maybe outside of Bengaluru, and it's so easy to find a problem for you, right? I'm talking about problems that are not so obvious. For example, problems that may be coming from a wilderness area, like a forest or like a valley, where apparently the bats came out of in China, in Wuhan district, or wherever. So if you were to get a chance to work in teachings around that, how would we be able to help in assisting the scientists like Dr. Utpal Tatu or Dr. Srinath in getting them to address what may be the potential dangers? For example, if I access somehow through the tribes or whatever, the wild animals. Can't hear you.
This is audio disturbance.
The audio seems not right.
Probably the same question
Cannot
can
see
be
her.
passed on to Sujaya.
Okay, so while Navina is trying to get her audio going, could you answer the question somehow? So the question is for you, Sujaya.
Oh, I think Navina is probably the better person to answer that question, I think.
Okay, but if you take an opportunity to how would you help working with the scientists? What is the help that the scientists can get from you in terms of whether working in the cities or working near a wilderness area?
Oh, yes. Let me give you a bit of background in which we've conducting these ABC ARD camps, as Sujaya had also mentioned. So, what we find is that in places, in urban setups like possibly Chennai or Jaipur or Bangalore, the effect of this program shows the rate of rabies transmission to humans drops dramatically. Other places which are surrounded by wild areas, like say some spots in cities in Kerala or even in other places in Deccan Plateau, because of the infiltration of animals from outside Deccan areas to domesticated regions, poses a very unique challenge. So what we've been seeing is for several years that all cities was able to achieve a near 10% success in vaccination of dogs against rabies, which are the main vector of rabies. But in cities are growing, the fastest growing city in India, had this unique challenge where these cities
Navina? Hello, Navina?
Sorry to interrupt. I think the audio is not proper. So probably we can move to the next question which we have.
Yeah, okay. Audio is a bit bad, so sorry about that. Maybe I can get an answer from you, which I can through WhatsApp or something, then I can pass it on to Biotechnica. So I have one last question. Both Dr. Tatu and Dr. Srinath can address this. So there was a question from Saurabh Kumar in the question on AA thing. How can we convince pharma companies to emphasize to work on neglected diseases and how to overcome this particular situation? Srinath first.
Well, I suggest that Professor Tatu is the right person to answer, but my personal take here is there are ways the funds can be availed by the pharma companies, because all they are looking is for a small investment of the money to figure out what is the potential of the molecules, right? And they can do a small testing of it, and then they can outsource to startups like us to do some kind of work. That's all I can say from my side.
All right. Professor Tatu, we can end the session with your answer.
Right. I think the pharma companies are basically set up with a motive of profitability. Let's not forget they are a business enterprise. So it's not a crime that they are not working, because they right away, the companies are formed with the idea. But many pharma companies, once they have become financially profitable and successful and have corpus, they then have programs to help in such areas, in such as neglected diseases. So big pharma companies often have some sort of as a part of their corporate social responsibilities, they do a small activity in these areas where the profit is not the only goal for them to do this work, to reach out to people and help the world. So that's one thing that happens, but it needs to be more than what it's happening. And especially, I think in India, it's not very visible as much as it is in the rest of the world. Second way to attract funding is, of course, through foundations such as Gates Foundation. They do a lot of work in this such areas, but I haven't seen much happening in neglected disease and especially in animal health area. But I think we need more examples of endowments, financial support, and leadership to big companies in India, which is not very visible. But yes, there are some all indications that it is beginning to happen. And of course, the government is always doing what it can to encourage and provide funding for this area. But that's just not enough because government has other priorities, of course. But yeah, other possible
All right.
sources.
So thank you so much, Shekhar. I think we are ending this Q&A session. There are lots of very good comments coming on the YouTube chat thing. They're really appreciating the knowledge that is being shared by both scientists as well as the animal welfareists. Thank you again for providing this platform for us to take this concept of One Health, and Biotechnica can be proud saying that we are doing our best to introduce the concept of One Health. And I noticed that the Bengaluru Technology Summit, which is going to happen next weekend, finally, they've also recognized One Health, and now they're going to be using this as a topic for conversation as well, for discussion as well. But Biotechnica went first. So congratulations to you, and thank you so much. And if you can just show my last slide, and then I'll pass on the controls to you. I just want everyone to remember One Health. One Health is the way to go. And for this, I thank all the speakers, and thanks again to Shekhar. Thank you. Over to you, Shekhar.
Thank you so much, sir. And thank you, Dr. Srinath and Dr. Utpal, Navina and Sujaya. It was really wonderful interacting with all of you this morning. Now, I have a couple of pointers which I noted down and I wanted to add up here. Now, the first thing is one of the statements told by our speaker today, that we are sitting on a ticking time bomb. One of those exploded in 2020, and we all started saying 2020 is the worst years of our life. No, 2020 is that year of our life when we all have to realize that One Health is the way to go. Human race should not be selfish and start killing those animals the moment there is a pandemic or there is a outbreak in their race, right? So we should not do that. Rather, we should try to proactively find a cure or try to stop it at the source instead of allowing it to grow, spread across what happened in Wuhan, something similar. Now, Sujaya and Navina are doing their job at a community level, trying to help those pets or those needy animals on the street, or community animals, as we say. And our scientists and entrepreneurs like Dr. Srinath and Dr. Utpal are doing their bit. But we cannot be successful without the active participation of all our audience. Yes, nature is the best healer. But if we all have to ensure that no such pandemic happens in future, then we must all listen to the scientists of today. We must all support the community leaders like Sujaya and Navina of today. And then only we will be on our path to One Health, where we will lead the human race as well as all the stakeholders like animals, like plants, and other biotic and abiotic components of our environment, and support them so that we live in a holistic environment and nobody damages each other. My dear audience, my dear subscribers, fans, and critics of Biotechnica, this morning what we witnessed was the most amazing thoughts and thought-provoking webinar which we conducted today. I want you to take action. Be an action taker. Start doing your bit. Like Dr. Srinath said, start switching off your ignition at your signal, right? The traffic signal or whatever. You have to do your bit. Go contribute and join those organizations where community leaders like Navina and Sujaya need your help and support. Okay, and now we have
support.
We got a support. So there is a pet dog which I have barking. Right, I got the support there from the animals. We do have the support there, but now we have some surprise gifts, and that can be given to you all if you fill out the feedback form. So we'll be sharing the feedback form now in the chat box. All right, please fill out the feedback form. Let us know if you like this webinar and how can we make more interactive webinars of the future. And I would like to thank Dr. Srinath and Dr. Utpal for joining us, and Dr. Mithur for once again helping us moderate one of the most powerful webinar. And from the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank Navina and Sujaya for the great work they are doing. I'm myself a very big animal supporter, and I wish that I will find some more time, coming and volunteering for the work which you guys are doing. You guys are doing an amazing job. Keep doing that. And thank you so much, people. We'll be sharing the feedback form shortly in the chat box. Yes, right there. You have the feedback form. Please don't forget to fill it out, and you shall have the surprise gifts. And I'll be sharing some more ebooks and PowerPoints related to this webinar shortly with you in email. All right. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.